Now to Washington, D.C., where Biden's expensive infrastructure bill is not sitting too well with Republicans. Some GOP senators took to the Sunday shows blasting the corporate tax proposal and saying that they'll only support a limited plan. Take a look.
Obviously, Democrats have figured out that infrastructure is something we need and something that's popular. And so they're trying to take 70% of this bill and call it infrastructure in a new way than we've ever talked about infrastructure before.
What the president proposed this week is not an infrastructure bill. It's a huge tax increase, for one thing, and it's a tax increase on small businesses, on job creators in the United States of America.
Yeah, Republicans not too happy about that infrastructure bill. Now, the Biden administration aiming to corral overwhelming public support and in turn persuade more people to support the bill. Bloomberg White House correspondent Nancy Cook has been all over this story, and she joins me now with what it means for negotiations. Nancy, thanks so much for being here. What is the strategy here, given that there is so much pushback in Congress from Republicans?
Well, the strategy that they're going to use politically is the same strategy that they used with the COVID relief bill. And that is basically the idea that building up public support outside of Washington with Republican voters and governors and mayors is going to be more important to build momentum from this bill than, building support among GOP lawmakers who have already expressed a ton of problems with it and already made it clear they're unlikely to support it. And that's the same thing we saw with the COVID relief bill. It's the same thing that the White House is going to do this time. They point to surveys and polling that show that over 70% of Republican voters are in favor of not just more spending for roads and bridges, but also things like expanding broadband access, making community colleges free. And so they're pointing to, a polling that says, look, your own base supports some of these things.
Yeah, and in fact, Nancy, as you well know, and so many of our viewers know, we see congressional Republicans even touting some elements of the $1.9 trillion relief package in terms of money that has been sent to their districts, despite the fact that not one single one of them actually voted to get that thing passed. Can Democrats actually do this without support from Republicans in the House and Senate?
They can. And so what Democrats, I think, are going to try to do is they will try to work with Republicans and meet with them. But I think that if they show that they don't want to do it, which it seems like they're signaling, they can do it through another budget maneuver, which they used for the COVID relief bill called reconciliation, which requires, just the Democrats to vote. So it really would just require keeping the Democrats unified. That will be tricky, but it won't be as hard as trying to get Republicans to support the bill. And the thing about that budget maneuver is that, some things may not end up, the parliamentarian may end up saying some things don't qualify to do it under this way. Some Democrats may not like all the spending. There'll definitely be tweaks to the bill. But, if they do end up passing it, which again is a huge if, they will do it by the same strategy of sort of appealing to the public and Republican voters, not worrying too much about trying to get Mitch McConnell to sign on.
Can you explain the parliamentary fight here and why not all Democrats might be on board?
Sure. Well, it's not just a parliamentarian fight. So there's a parliamentarian in the Senate who basically will say whether all aspects of this bill after it's negotiated sort of qualify for this kind of budget maneuver, which is really supposed to be just related to things having to do with taxes and spending. And so the parliamentarian will have to make that judgment call. The other hurdle is just going to be keeping Democrats on board broadly. The Democratic caucus is big. It encompasses everything from Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who has certain ideas about this bill, to progressives like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, who are going to want them to raise taxes, spend a bunch of money. Really, they believe in a big government footprint. And so the Biden White House's trick, I think, is going to be having to really keep all the Democrats unified. And that will be the biggest challenge for them.
There are some Republicans who want the U.S. to spend on infrastructure. How do they want the U.S. to pay for it, though, if they're against raising taxes? Because this stuff does cost money.
It does. So a bunch of Republicans and the Chamber of Commerce, for instance, have come out and said, we are interested in an infrastructure bill, but they can't really agree on how to pay for it. So some folks think that, it doesn't necessarily have to be paid for. Some folks are saying, you could do it through user fees or maybe a gas tax. But the question question of how to pay for it is really what is hardest for Democrats too. They're trying to figure out how to do it. I will say that Democrats and people in the White House would point to polling again that shows that the idea of taxing corporations and wealthy people at this point, particularly when so many of those, particularly when wealthy people have done so well financially during the pandemic, that is a popular idea. And so they're really going to go after that.
Bloomberg White House reporter Nancy Cook. Nancy, thank you as always for your time. Great to have you join us on Quick Take this morning.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.